psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy, and the so-called religions of Asia, there is common ground because both are interested in changing states of human consciousness. Whereas institutional Western religion, Christianity, Judaism, and even Islam are relatively less interested in this matter. Western religions are more concerned with behavior, doctrine, and belief than with any transformation of the way in which we are aware of ourselves and of the world. But this matter concerns psychiatry and psychology very much. Only those states of consciousness which are not normal are usually treated in Western psychology as being in some way sick. There are, of course, exceptions to this, and there have increasingly been exceptions. In the work of Jung, and to some extent even of Grodek, of Prinzhorn, of more modern people, Rogers, and Ronald Lang, changing consciousness is often looked upon as a form of therapy. But in general, different states of consciousness from the normal are regarded as a form of sickness. And therefore, official and institutional psychiatry constitutes itself the guardian of sanity and of socially approved experience of reality. And very often it seems to me that reality appears rather much the way the world is seen on a bleak Monday morning in this official doctrine, I might even say dogma, of what reality is. Because after all, we know that our science, such as it is of psychology, is founded in the scientific naturalism of the 19th century. And the metaphysical and mythological assumptions of that science still underlie a great deal of psychological thinking, in behaviorism eminently, but also to a large extent in official psychoanalysis. Indeed, one might say that psychoanalysis is based on Newtonian mechanics and in fact could be called psychohydraulics. Not that that analogy is altogether inappropriate, because there are certainly respects in which our psychic life flows and exhibits the dynamics of water. But of course, we want to know what kind of water. And for the scientific naturalism of the 19th century, the basic energies of nature were considered to be very much inferior to human consciousness in quality. Ernst Haeckel, a biologist of that time, would think of the energy of the universe as blind energy. And correspondingly, it seems to me that Freud thought of the libido as essentially blind, unconscious energy, embodying only a kind of formless, unstructured, and insatiable lust. This is a generalization. Some modification in that thinking is, of course, possible. But the tendency is to regard all that which lies below the surface of human consciousness as being less evolved, because you must remember that this was also the time of Darwin's theories of evolution, of seeing the human mind as a fortuitous development from much more primitive forms of life, coming forth by purely mechanical processes, by natural selection, and by the survival of the fittest. And therefore, man was in general seen as a fluke of nature, an embodiment of reason, emotion, and values, for which the more basic processes of nature had no sympathy and about which they did not care. If, therefore, the human race is to flourish, we must take charge of evolution. It can no longer be left to spontaneous process, but must be directed by human ingenuity, despite the fact that although our brains are capable of dealing with a colossal number of variables at once, our conscious attention is not. Most people cannot consider more than 3 variables at the same time without using a pencil. And this shows that in many ways, the scanning process of man's conscious attention is very inadequate for dealing with the infinitely many variables, the multidimensional processes of the natural universe. However, a serious attempt has been made, and scientific naturalism issued in a fantastic fight with nature. In this whole notion of the conquest and subordination of nature, which has, as a matter of fact, very ancient, non-scientific and biblical origins, with the idea of man as the head and chief and ruler of nature in the image of God. And the time has now dawned upon us all when our attempts to beat nature into submission are having alarming results, because we see that it's very dangerous to mess around with processes that we don't understand, that have enormous numbers of variables, and we begin to wonder whether we hadn't better let well enough alone. At the same time, although I said that Western psychology had more in common, or more common interest with Oriental religion than it does with Western religion, there is a sense in which psychiatry and psychotherapy are becoming the religion of the West. Psychoanalysis has much in common with the forms and procedures of institutional religion. There is, for example, apostolic succession, the passing down of mana, of qualified power to practice therapy, from the father founder, Sigmund Freud, through his immediate apostles, to an enormous company of archbishops and bishops, among whom there are, of course, as there were with Christianity, heresiarchs, such as Jung and Grodek and Rank and Reich. And the heresiarchs are duly excommunicated and anathematized. There are rituals, as there are also rituals with religion. There is the sacrament of the couch. There is the spiritual discipline of free association. There is the mystic knowledge of the interpretation of dreams. And there are also the 2 great symbolic fetishes, the long one and the round one. Now, it's extraordinarily easy to make fun of all this. And we must not forget that we owe a tremendous debt to Freud, if for nothing else than pointing out that much of ourselves of which we are aware in terms of the conscious ego is not really ourselves. It is something superficial. However we define its nature, it is superficial. And the realities of human life are not under the gaze of its scanning process, at least not in the ordinary way. And that was a tremendous revelation. There's no question about that. But one sees troublesome signs when the doctrines and processes of psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and so forth become officialized. And I think Thomas Sass, in his books, The Myth of Mental Illness and The Manufacture of Madness, is pointing out something extremely important to us, which is that, in effect, the psychological official of today is the priest, and that he is beginning to exercise the same sort of controls over human life as were exercised by the church in the Middle Ages. So that a professor of psychiatry at Columbia or Harvard or Yale medical schools has today the same sort of intellectual respectability and authority as the professor of theology at the University of Toledo or Padua would have had in the year 1400. Now you must realize that the theologians of those days not simply believed in their cosmology and the theology, they almost knew it was true in the same way that our scientists know certain things to be true. Despite the fact that they change their opinions very often, while they hold them, they have in effect the force of dogma, as witness the anathematization of Velikovsky for his uncomfortable ideas. And therefore, there are heresies existing today which are persecuted in the same way as heresies were persecuted by the Holy Inquisition. And they are persecuted out of kindness, in exactly the same way that the Holy Inquisition persecuted heresy out of kindness and deep concern for human beings. That is unimaginable to us, but it was so. For after all, if you seriously believe that someone who did not hold the Catholic faith and who voluntarily rejected it would be tortured physically and spiritually forever and ever and ever in hell, you would resort to almost any means to preserve a fellow human being from such a fate, especially if the complaint or disease of heresy from which he suffered was infectious. You would first of all reason with him. And if he was not responsive to reason, you would resort to abuse and to forceful argument. And if he was not responsive to that, you would give him shock treatment and bang him about. If that didn't work, the thumbscrew and the rack and the Iron Maiden. And if that didn't work, as a last desperate resort, you would burn him at the stake in the pious hope that in the midst of those searing fires he would think better and make a last act of perfect contrition, and so be rescued from everlasting damnation. And you did all this with the spirit of this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you, in the spirit of a surgeon who is very, very sorry indeed that he has to make you undergo this extremely painful operation. But it is in your best interests, and there really is at least a 50-50 chance that you may survive. And so, therefore, in perfectly scientific medical spirit, people may be very arbitrarily and without due process deprived of their civil rights, incarcerated in prisons that are in many cases much worse than prisons for criminals, and generally left to rot, be neglected and ignored, and when bumptious, given shock treatment or put in solitary confinement. For what? Because they have unorthodox and heretical states of consciousness. A lot of these people are not dangerous until provoked into being dangerous by being ignored, by being treated as machines, and generally defined as non-human. And if you are defined as non-human, there's precious little you can do about it, because everything you say that sounds human will be taken as a kind of utterance of a mechanical man, as imitating humanness out of lunatic cunning. You will be suspicious. Everything you say will be listened to in a different way and with different ears. And you will have one hell of a time talking yourself out of it, because there really are no rules as to what one must do when incarcerated for having unorthodox consciousness. There is no clear road to repentance. And this is found likewise in jails, where people are incarcerated on 1 to 10-year sentences, as in places like Vacaville, California, where when I visited such prisons, young men have come to me in perfect desperation, saying, I don't know what's happened to me, because I want to live like a decent citizen. I know I've done things that are wrong, but I simply don't know what is expected of me here. If I try to do what's expected, they say I'm compliant. And that seems to be some sort of a sickness. Thomas Sass drew attention to this when he quoted a discussion of the types of school children who may very well need therapy. There were overachieving children. There were underachieving children. There were children who exhibited erratic patterns. There were children who were sort of dully mediocre. In fact, every sort of child can be given a diagnostic name for his behavior which sounds sick. As Jung once suggested, life itself is a disease with a very poor prognosis. It lingers on for years and invariably ends with death. And I submit that in our present knowledge of the human mind, such power in the hands of psychiatrists is amazingly dangerous. For I would suggest that today we know about as much concerning the human mind as we knew about the galaxy in 1300. And that while there are indeed individuals who are certainly able to perform psychotherapy, it is the sheerest arrogance for anybody to say that he is officially qualified to do so. We do not know how it is done, just as we do not know, really, how musical, artistic, and literary genius is done. You cannot really teach it. You can put the tools for doing these things into people's hands, and you can show them how to use the tools. But whether they will use those tools with genius is quite unpredictable. And this is above all true of the art of psychotherapy. We don't know how it's done. We've got some vague ideas. There probably are some people who, by reason of their mental derangement, are probably not qualified to perform it, because they are maybe out just to make other people into messes. But to say that there are certain standards and certain examinations that can be passed and certificates that can be issued, which do indeed qualify people for this work, is, I think, pernicious nonsense. And is used, of course, out of economic self-interest when those who consider themselves official therapists run into competition. The same was done by religion. I was talking, imagine it, to a Buddhist priest in Thailand some years ago. I was looking at some books in a bookshop in the precincts of a Buddhist temple. And I was wandering over, and I noticed a book on a certain form of Buddhist meditation. And I murmured, Satipatthana, which is the name of a certain kind of Buddhist meditation. And a voice suddenly said to me, you practice Satipatthana? I looked up, and there was a skinny Buddhist monk in a yellow robe with rather red eyes looking at me. I said, not exactly Satipatthana. I used a different method. It's called Zen. Oh, Satipatthana, not Zen. I said, oh, well, it's something like it, isn't it? No. Well, it's rather like yoga, I said, isn't it? Not yoga. No. Satipatthana, different. Only right way. Well, look, I said to him, I have a lot of Roman Catholic friends who tell me that their way is the only right way. Who am I to believe? You know, I said, you're like someone who's got a ferry boat for crossing the river. I used the Buddhist simile. And another fellow down the stream has opened up ferry business. And you go to the government and say, he's not authorized to operate a ferry boat because he's competition to you. Let all operate ferry boats who will. And if you haven't got the sense to stay off one that sinks, it's your fault. And after all, I could say to him, you believe that everything that happens to you is your own karma. But why worry? But now, it's so interesting that since official psychiatry, and I underline that word official because I hope those of you in this audience who are therapists will regard yourselves as unofficial. Lisa, that'll give you an out. But nevertheless, official psychiatry has curious things in common with Western religion, as well as with Eastern. With Eastern, I said, only insofar as it has an interest in states of consciousness and inclines to regard other states of consciousness than the ordinary as sick. But it has one very important feature in common with Western religion. And to that, we have to go a little bit into Western religious history and ask ourselves what in Western religion, and especially in Christianity, and this goes also for Judaism and Islam, what is the great heresy? Curiously enough, the great heresy was first in the West committed by no less a person than Jesus Christ, who believed himself to be God. This, of course, will be unquestionably true if you think that the Gospel of St. John has historical value. It's a little vaguer in the Synoptic Gospels, but if you read the Gospel of St. John, there is absolutely no doubt about it, for he said, I and the Father are one. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. He said all that according to this gospel. And that is something that in the Western world you are not supposed to say. Especially you are not supposed to believe it. And naturally it was very difficult for Jesus because he was saying all this in the context of the Hebrew culture. And he tried to find language in the Hebrew scriptures with which to express his state of consciousness, because he had an unusual state of consciousness. As I read it, he had cosmic consciousness, otherwise known as mystical experience, otherwise known as moksha, nirvana, bodhi, satori, fana alvana, or what you will. And that happens to people. It has happened as far back as we know. It happens all over the world and in all cultures. We don't know very much about it. We don't really know ways in which to make it happen because it seems to be of the nature of it that it is a spontaneous surprise. But it unquestionably happens. And most people keep their mouths shut about it when it does. I had a friend who in the middle of having a stroke had this illumination. And he said to me, I fear to speak to my friends of this, but it was the most beautiful experience. I shall never be afraid of death. In fact, I recommend everyone to have a stroke. This was my friend Jean Vardler, lately deceased Greek painter. But Jesus certainly had this transformation of consciousness, and he was crucified for it. Why? Because he had committed an act of insubordination and treason against the cosmic government. Because if you believe that God is a monarch, an absolute, omniscient, and omnipotent authority, shall we say a sort of cosmic ego, then to claim to be that is to introduce democracy into the kingdom of heaven, to usurp divine authority, and to speak in its name without proper authorization. And they asked Jesus, by what authority do you speak? Of heaven or of men? And he was tricky about answering that one. He said, by what authority did John the Baptist speak? And they were nervous about answering that one. He could have asked, by what authority did Isaiah speak, etc., or Moses. But Moses became official authority. And if you could wangle it, that what you said was simply an extension of what Moses said, because Rabbi so-and-so said it, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Moses, then it's okay. Notice this, that to be an authority today in the academic world depends on documentation. It's not enough to say, for I say unto you, you must put in your footnotes. And the more the footnotes, the more the authority, obviously. So, our dissertations tend to be books about books, about books, about books. And our libraries multiply by mitosis. So, when somebody speaks as an authority, that means speaks as the author. That's all it means. It's a statement of which you are the author, and therefore for which you assume responsibility. That is to speak with authority. And to be original is likewise not to be freaky, but to speak from the origin. That is what Christians mean when they say to speak in the Spirit, to have your mouth possessed by the Holy Spirit, as they believe the mouth of Jesus was possessed by the Holy Spirit. So the gospel of Jesus, which of course was hushed up from its inception, was that wake up everybody and find out who you are. Asking that, again in the Gospel of St. John, they, pointing to his disciples, may be one, even as you, Father, and I are one. And when he was accused of blasphemy, the Jews took up stones to stone him, you know. And he said, many good works have I shown you from the Father, and from which of these do you stone me? And they said, for a good work we don't stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. Now listen to the reply. He said, is it not written in your law, I have said ye are gods? And if that is what the scripture says, it can't be denied. So why do you tell me I blaspheme because I say I am a son of God? No answer. Because I said I am a son of God. It doesn't say that in your King James translation. It says I am the son of God. And you'll see the "the" italicized, and you will think that that is for emphasis if you don't realize that passages in italics in the King James Bible are interpolations by the translators. So, son of, in Hebrew and in Arabic, means of the nature of. When we call someone a son of a bitch, we mean bitchy. And so if you call someone a son of God, you mean divine. Of the nature of God. As the Nicene Creed subsequently defined it, he is of one substance with the Father. But what happened was that this being blasphemy for the Jews. It became blasphemy for the Christians, for anyone else than Jesus to say it. They said, okay, baby, it was so with you, but there it stops. No more of this business. And as a result of that, Jesus was made irrelevant by pedestalization, by being kicked upstairs. Oh, wow. In spite of the fact that he said, greater works than these that I do shall you do. Oh no, upstairs with you, baby, because we just can't have that sort of thing going on in a monarchical universe. We're not going to have democracy in the kingdom of heaven. So, this is why the gospel is impossible, because we're supposed to follow the example of Christ, where he says, for example, be not anxious for the morrow. Do not worry about what you shall eat, what you shall drink, and what you shall wear. God will take care of you. Doesn't he take care of the birds? Don't the flowers grow? They're wonderful. They're crazy. They're great. What are you worrying about? I've never heard a sermon preached on that. Never. Because it's totally subversive. The economy would crash. So they say, oh, yes, that's all very well, but he was the boss's son. See, he had that colossal advantage. Take up your cross and follow him. Hey, but wait a minute. I don't know I'm going to be resurrected 3 days later. I can't do all those miracles. He had an unfair advantage. So how can you ask us to follow the example of Christ? But supposing he didn't have an unfair advantage. Supposing that what was true about Jesus as a Son of God is true of us. Only a few of us know it. And we are pretty careful to be quiet about it, lest the same thing happen to us as happened to Jesus. And indeed it often does. And you know, you get these people from Arkansas or Texas or anywhere in the Bible Belt who never heard of the Upanishads. And they have this cosmic consciousness experience. And they realize that that's what happened to Jesus. They say, I'm Jesus, come back. Well, everybody says to them, you aren't Jesus. It's pretty obvious you're not Jesus. You're just Joe Dokes. Well, he says that's what they said about Jesus. He has a perfect argument, except they say you're not much of a Jesus. They say, all right, if you're Jesus, command that these stones be made bread. And he says, a wicked and deceitful generation seeketh for a sign, and there shall no sign be given. Now, why talk about this? Is it interesting? Is it important for the human being to realize that in some sense of the word, whatever it means, he is God or one with God, as is plainly taught by the Hindus, hinted at by the Buddhists, only they don't like to put it out as a concept, in case people will use the concept as an idol to hang on to. They want you to find out for yourself and not believe in it. And certainly the Taoists understand it, the Sufis understand it, a lot of people understand. But so what? Well, the importance of it is this, that to know that you are God is another way of saying that you feel completely with this universe. You feel profoundly rooted in it and connected with it. You feel, in other words, that the whole energy which expresses itself in the galaxies is intimate. It is not something to which you are a stranger, but it is that with which you, whatever that is, are intimately bound up. that in your seeing, your hearing, your talking, your thinking, your moving, you express that which it is which moves the sun and other stars. And if you don't know that, if you don't feel that, well, naturally you feel alien, you feel a stranger in the world, and if you feel a stranger, you feel hostile. And therefore, you start to bulldoze things about, to beat it up, and to try and make the world submit to your will, and you become a real troublemaker. So I feel also one reason why you become hostile is that feeling that you were just brought into this place, that your father and mother went up to some monkey business that they probably shouldn't have done, or it was bad rubber goods, and as a result of this, here you are, and you didn't ask to be here. Well, you always feel you can turn around and blame them. You can blame somebody. You can blame the government. You can blame the rascals. You can blame the cheaters. Always supposing you yourself aren't a rascal, which is a long odds. You always can blame someone and say, I didn't ask for it. Take it away. And yet, very few people are all too ready to take it away. Camus said that the only serious philosophical problem is whether or not to commit suicide. And if you don't say take it away, what are you going to do? You've really got to assume responsibility for it. You've got to say yes to what happens. It's my karma. And that doesn't mean merely, there are many misinterpretations of the doctrine of karma. It's usually and popularly understood that what happens to you, either fortunate or unfortunate, is the result of good or bad deeds in a previous life. Well, that's popular superstition. The real meaning of karma, the word in Sanskrit means simply doing. And if I say of an event, it is your karma, it is saying it is your doing. So the exposition, a book which would expound karma, would be not so much a whodunit as a youdunit. But that seems fantastic. Now, therefore, what I propose we do is that we, instead of just ideologizing, we have a clinical experience. You know, in psychiatric school, medical school, it's very usual for a doctor to bring a patient out in front of the students and talk with the patient as a kind of demonstration. He says, I want you to recognize the difference between a psychopath and then a manic depressive or a schizophrenic or something. They don't know what all these things mean. And especially the schizophrenia. And so he has a dialogue with the patient right there. So let us suppose that I'm the patient, and you are the students and the doctors. And I suffer from what you would call the delusion that I'm God. And therefore, you might want to do something about me or with me, or humor me or ask me questions. And so I'm perfectly willing to submit to your examination and your treatment and invite you to help yourselves.
When did you become God?
Now.
Will you marry me?
No. Yes. Sleeping is like politics. One sleeps on the right side, and then when you're tired of that, you sleep on the left. When you're tired of that, you sleep on your back. And when you're tired of that, you sleep on your stomach. And it is thus that the world goes round.
If you were God now, what were you yesterday?
Now, become God.
Am I also God?
Yes.
Are we then the same person?
No. Remember, 3 persons, but 1 God. Could I tell you a little bit about Satan? Yes. Although the matter is a little esoteric, but I told you all about it in the book of Job, where you will see that in the court of heaven, Satan is the district attorney. He is not, as Christians imagine, the enemy of heaven and the enemy of mankind. He's merely the person who sees the bad side of things and carries out the dirty work. And therefore, he saw Job and wondered whether Job really was as great a guy as he seemed to be, and suggested that God should appoint a committee of investigation to find out. And the committee did its work very thoroughly, but the case went against Satan because it was proved in the end that Job was an honorable man. Now you notice that although we pay the salary of the district attorney, whenever there's a great criminal case before the public eye, people begin to take the side of the underdog. And the prosecutor always has less public sympathy than the defense, except in political trials. On the right hand of God, and you know the defense is always on the right hand of the judge in court, is our only mediator and advocate, which is a phrase referring to Jesus Christ our Lord. So there is the defense and there is the prosecution. And it is the function of Satan to be the prosecutor. There is a good deal more to it than that, because before all this started, as in a stage play, there was an arrangement in the green room before coming on stage in which certain things were understood, but that are only to be revealed when the curtain goes down at the end of the play.
Is Job God too?
Yes, but he doesn't know it.
God, why do you hide from the sight of so many?
Why do you hide? It's for the same reason you're hiding. Yes. Who else? What? Man has free will to the extent that he knows who he is. Not otherwise. Where I got it from. Yes. To the extent that she knows who she is, yes.
If man has free will, know just what he is, and man is God, then you say that you are no more than any God in this room, or any man.
That is correct. I'm no more God than any of you.
Then you only have the power to know who you are.
Well, that is saying quite a bit, yes.
What is not God?
What is not God? There is nothing that is not God.
You learn who you are.
It's like waking up from a dream. After a while, one's experience begins to have what I would call a haven't we been here before feeling. Going round and round and round. And then you begin wondering, where am I going? And to answer that question, you have to try and find out what you want. And so I went into that very thoroughly. What do I want to happen? And, of course, as soon as you ask yourself that, you begin to fantasize. And our amazing technology is, of course, an expression of human desire for power, for what we want to achieve. So I simply set myself to thinking through how far we could go. And so I soon found myself at a great push-button place where I had a fantastic mechanism with buttons available for every conceivable thing I could wish. So I spent quite a bit of time playing with those. And science fiction wasn't it. You know, you go going like that, and here is Cleopatra. And so on, and then press this button, symphonic music in the 4-channel sound, 16-channel sound, anything, all possible pleasures are available. And when, you're like everybody's dream of the Sultan in the palace, you suddenly notice there's a button labeled surprise. You push that, and here we are. Yes, boredom is, of course, the problem. Boredom is the other side of creativity. And the energy of creation has that is the yang, the yin side of that energy is called boredom. Everything, of course, is fundamentally yang and yin. If you understand that, you really don't need to understand anything else.
As God, what responsibility do you feel to ameliorate evil in the world?
As God, what responsibility do I feel to ameliorate evil in the world? I begin with the point that I am responsible for the way the world is. If I couldn't feel that, I'd have to blame somebody else. I'm not willing to do that, because I know that under various changing circumstances, it might be appropriate for me to be as big a rascal as rascals have been. Now, as to improving the world is always improving. It may look to some people slow, but it's improving even when it is declining, because the world works in an undulatory process, like a wave. It goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. And it couldn't go up all the time, because if it did, we wouldn't know that that was up. So it goes down some of the time so that we can know when it goes up, because if we didn't know when it went up, it would be like being in a space where everything was light. There'd be nothing to write home about. There would be no black marks on the space, and so it would be like a piece of perfectly empty paper. Similarly, to be in a completely black space would also be a kind of unconsciousness with nothing to write home about, because there'd be nothing would make any difference. So therefore, if you're going to have black, you won't know that it's black unless you have some white, and if you're going to have white, you won't know that it's white unless you have some black.
Why don't you just all love one another, because if we get to that point, there won't be any up and down, right?
Correct, but that's not a teaching, it's a koan. A koan. A koan is a Japanese word for a spiritual problem used in Zen Buddhism, such as, what is the sound of one hand? And these problems are given to those who ask questions concerning their spiritual development. And sometimes, as St. Paul pointed out, commandments are given not in the expectation that they will be obeyed, but in the expectation that they will reveal something to those who hear them. That was St. Paul's comment on the whole Mosaic law. Yes, sir. What? Yes. The hereafter is, of course, now. Because if you will examine it closely, there is no when else than now. And if you want to make hell of it, you can make hell of it. If you want to make heaven of it, you can make heaven of it. Purgatory, purgatory. It's all here. Always was, always will be. What is death? Death is an undulation in consciousness. How would you know you were alive unless you'd once been dead? Yes.
You realize the same way that Jesus did to kill God, why was it unnecessary for him to have material possessions necessary for you?
It wasn't unnecessary for him to have material possessions. They said of St. John the Baptist that he was an ascetic, but of Jesus, this man consorts with gluttoners and wine bibbers and comes eating and drinking. And when the Lady Mary poured precious ointment on his feet and anointed him, they said the same thing that the members of the vestry say to the minister today. Why this great expense? Couldn't it all have been sold for much money and given to the poor?
But it's a problem.
It is a problem, sure. But you see, in many ways, when you get down to these very deep ethical problems, where there sure is no easy decision one way or the other, you must look at the problem from the point of view of an artist. Which way of doing this is in some sense greater? It may be better to go off with a bang than with a whimper. Let me see.
Are
Yeah,
you done all the time? I mean, consciousness all the time.
there is no time, my dear. It's always now.
And during every event. At every precise moment.
Oh,
Are you
yes, if you put it that way, of course.
You are consciously God and experiencing unit on this plane of
Wait a moment, consciously, not necessarily, because that would spoil the fun.
that's what I'm asking.
If you press button surprise, you'll press the button so that you forget who you are.
Okay, so that you don't always know the answers to a given problem.
Yes, that's perfectly true. This is called, in the Bible, kenosis. In St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians, he says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought not equality with God a thing to be grasped, but humbled himself, and made himself of no reputation, and was found in fashion as a man, and became obedient to death." And so you get from this the kenotic theory of creation, held by some of the Greek fathers, that the creation of the universe is the self-emptying or self-forgetting of the Godhead. Yes, I think it's your turn now.
How does your concept of the creation of evil so that man could see how good is different from the old story of man beating his head against the wall so he could feel how good it is and stuff?
It's really rather like it. Because the universe is fundamentally a system which creeps up on itself and then says, boo. And then it laughs at itself for jumping. And you see, every time it does it, it forgets that it did it before. So it never becomes a bore. Yes, the lady in red.
Can you make yourself into a point of consciousness to travel around the cosmos, such as Dr. Lilly was speaking of last night in terms of Dr. Tory?
Yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. The question is, can I make myself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos and see things from all sorts of places? I say, yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. One is already there. In other words, I'm using your eyes where you are, like you're using mine. Just in the same way, my head is not my feet, it uses my feet. The head is very different from the feet. You couldn't possibly say the head and the feet are the same, but they are one organism.
They each have a soul.
Two.
What do you do about boredom?
What do I do about boredom? Press button surprise.
Oh, it's always there.
Yes, always. Yes, the lady in purple here.
You talk about boredom. It seems to me, at least in my own case, and in many people, one of the biggest problems in life is being forced to earn a living in something that you not want to value. And I often wonder if the answer to there and live on less money and do the things that I would like to do? Or must I resign myself, as many people have, to do the thing that gets me the bread, and then in my spare time, sometimes try to make up for the many days, weeks, and years of the time of half living? What is the answer?
Well, there are two sort of answers, one of which you've already indicated, which is to do with less and do what you want. Which,
When I did that, those things, the medical things, sort of accepting as part of life, wouldn't get done.
I think the objection, if everyone did that, is rather like asking what would happen if everybody wanted to catch the 4 o'clock train from Grand Central to Westport. Or if all the molecules of air in this room were suddenly to congregate over in that corner. There is a bare chance that it might happen, but very low. Yes.
Did you say we're going around in circles trying to eliminate evil? Because we never will, we might not be able to
Yes.
eliminate it, we're just playing games.
We are going round in circles. But you see, going round in circles, as you may have observed by looking at the sky, is what the universe is doing. You see, before,
As long as we recognize it, we're all right.
yes. Yes, that's the thing. It's a dance. And when you dance, you don't dance to get somewhere. Yes, all right, but when you wake up, you turn the confusion into a dance. And so I go back to your question. What is the alternative to clearing out of the job you're doing? And to say doing with less but having more fun? Well, there are ways of making almost any activity into a dance. Supposing you had to drive a bus in New York, which is a very harrowing job in the ordinary way, you must not take seriously anything about it. This is the first rule. That it doesn't matter a damn if you don't get there on time, but it would be fun to go as fast as is consistent with safety. And therefore, you swing that bus, and you play things with the horn. You take the whole thing lightly, as if it is not serious. Because this is the nature, say, in ritual, when you have a procession. Now, people who don't understand religion don't know how to make the right kind of processions. There are those who go in military march, and they don't understand it because their objective is to get there. There are those who dawdle like ducks, and they don't understand because they are trying to be dignified. On the other hand, there are those who walk as if they had already arrived. And this is the way kings walk. Because a king is the center, and he is always where it's at. Where it's at is where the king is by definition. So, if you work in this way, people who are practicing meditation take up monotonous things for fun. And meditation is supposed to be fun. I hope John Lilly told you that this morning. Where you say you're going to do Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You can really have a gas thing. And so that anything monotonous can be treated in the same way. This is one of the ways of overcoming boredom. Because boredom is the great problem for energy. The energy is always on the go. Yes, sir. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt.
Does it bother you to be called
Mythic? No. Mythic is a great word. The question is, does it bother me to be called mythic? No. Myth is very powerful. Myth is fun. Myth is stories told to children. Everybody loves them. Yes, sir. What? Is God omniscient? Well, it depends what you mean by the word. A lot of people think that omniscience is like knowing everything that's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not omniscience, that's intellectual elephantiasis. Now, you see, let me explain this question because it's always important. And when anybody announces that he or she is God, people say at once, well, will you tell us in millimeters the height of Mont Blanc? When I say look it up in the encyclopedia, it's there. The thing is this. What we ordinarily call knowledge is the translation of life into words. And that is a very cumbersome process because if we had to translate the process into words every time we took a breath, we'd never get around to it. It takes so long to describe and think through the whole physiology of breath. Therefore, we do it without thinking about it. And I find that I'm shining the stars in just the same way. I mean, if you want it in words, it's going to take us a long time to get through them because words are strung out in a line.
Eternally, we are, and we are all gods. Our as gods, what says that we are all gods, that's why our minds are difficult to recognize, understand, and find this tranquility within ourselves.
How do you, if you are God, how do you find such difficulty in finding peace and tranquility in yourself? That's because you're looking for it away from the place in which you are. You are seeking it apart from the experience which you have at this moment. And you are regarding that experience and saying, that's pretty lousy, I'd like something better than that. But the trouble with that is that it splits you in two pieces. And once you're split in two pieces, you're lost. Because you made a difference between the experience you are now having on the one hand and yourself who is having it on the other. And you wish you could get away from that experience. Now, the truth of the matter is you can't, because you are what you experience. It's a myth purely that there is some sort of experiencer who has the experience. You are what you know, because it is not I know something, there is simply a process called the knowing. You could say the knowing, like the world, has two poles, north and south. And so the knowing ball has the knower and the known, but only in that sense. Now, knowing changes. It changes itself. But if you try to stand outside it and change it, it'll be like standing outside your hand and trying to move your hand from outside. And so comes the difficulty. In other words, this would be the difficulty for God in the press button surprise situation, where you think you want something different from what you have. But if you do think that, you've got to ask yourself the question, what it is that you really want. This is the most fundamentally important question. And you will find, if you go into it very, very deeply, that you have it. Now, you may change your mind about it, but you do have what you want.
God's place caught on fire, I would find myself so scared that I wondered if I would also feel that I was God, and if I am God and scared, what do I do about that?
Well, one of the ways of not being bored is to scare yourself.
Yes.
Don't we all go to the movies just to be scared? We put certain limits on it, indeed, before we go and say this isn't really going to happen. It's only a play or a movie. And therefore, while we see the safe outline of the proscenium arch, back in the back of our minds as a sort of Hintergedanke, we know it's only a play.
I'm talking about what it isn't going to be.
How do you know it isn't? If you see, after all, the task of the actor on the stage is to come on so well that the audience thinks it's real. So that he has them crying, so that he has them shaking with fear, so that he has them sitting on the edges of their chairs. Well, that's just one ordinary Joe Doakes actor, but supposing the actor of the play is the real big actor. Wow, that play would seem real. So that's what happens when the house cat is on fire. Yes, Lady in Red. Yes, you're looking behind yourself. What is sleep? The seventh day. What? When is the seventh day? When you sleep. Yes.
Yes, God. The only reason I know that I'm God is because I take the responsibility for it.
Yes.
Does that answer the lady's question about fire?
Oh, yes, that also would answer it. Yes. It's a question of taking responsibility for what happens.
What happens if you don't do anything about it?
If I don't do anything about the world, the boredom.
What's
Well, that's another way. That's another way. You can explore boredom. You can bore into boredom and watch it. Sometimes when you're bored, that's the only thing to do. Because even for God, you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Because that is by nature of the definition impossible.
You said you would enjoy having been of you.
Yes, I think that would be fun. I mean, why else does one go on stage except to make myths? What?
Yeah.
Excuse me, what did you say? What is my motivation for going on the stage? That is like asking, why is there a universe? Well, now, if you listened to George Leonard last night, George Leonard explained how children were befuddled by being taught to ask why about everything. Because you always look away from what you're asking about to its antecedents, and that won't lead you anywhere at all. Why am I here? And I answer that question. Then somebody says, well, why that? And then somebody says, well, why that? Why that? Why that? And you get back and back and back, and eventually you get tired of answering. And so fathers, when their children say, why, Daddy? Why? They say, oh, shut up and eat your lollipop. So, but what happens, you see, when we trace the causation of things into the past, it all begins to fade out in silence and no answer. Why? Because it didn't begin there. The universe begins now. It didn't begin in the past. And the past trails back from now like the wake of a ship.
Everything there's no time to now. What is the role of chance?
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance? Chance pairs with order. We'll say randomness, we'll call it, and it pairs with order. And it is part of the nature of order. If you know what you mean by order, you know that you mean contrast with randomness. And if you know what you mean by randomness, you know that you mean contrast with order. So if you want to have order, you must have randomness, and vice versa. Yes?
You have this much charisma before you discovered the true nature.
Yes, but it came out in a different way. Yes.
Because there's such danger here, though the riddles are funny, and if you have time, I think each one will be right found. There's a certain danger of everything and everyone being God, because if you really found yourself as God, then you know that certain things that you as God have created that don't personally affect you, you create for a reason, you stay out of them, and you go on a do-gooder. But if you think you're God, and then you try to go into too much social action and change the equals of this world, you end up hurting yourself and a lot of people, and you're playing God and you're not really being God.
Well, I admit to you, my dear, that this is a very, very dangerous conversation. And that I thoroughly agree with, but we didn't come here, did we, to play it safe. All profound ideas and profound questions are dangerous. It is dangerous to go into science, as we all know too well. It is dangerous to go into medicine, dangerous to go into writing, because the pen is often mightier than the sword. And so I don't think we should withdraw from certain things because they're dangerous. But I entirely agree with you that if I were, as it were, in the spirit of God to go about social reform, I would be failing to realize the construction of my own universe, which is that when you interfere with it, you've got to know exactly how you're interfering. Otherwise, the most amazingly unexpected things will happen. So when people ask for miracles, they don't realize what the miracles involve. I mean, if I turned the microphone into a rabbit, it's altogether possible that you might drop dead, because those events might be connected.
Did you ever study with Carl Jung?
Did I ever study with Carl Jung?
Work with him?
I didn't study with him. I knew him, and I read a lot of his writings. Yes.
Notion of watching yourself, like you're watching his word, or being aware of yourself, imply that there's a separation somewhere.
It does in a way, yes. And it depends how you're watching. There is a very interesting thing that comes up in this respect with regard to the Bhagavad Gita and to the Yoga Sutra, where they talk about the witness. There is, as it were, behind our ordinary self with its emotions and involvements, a witness self that does nothing more than perceive what happens. And this is the Atman, or the Purusha, which is not involved. And some of you, no doubt, especially in times of crisis, have suddenly discovered this sort of witness center behind everything that just isn't involved. Most terrible things can be going on, but the witness is impassive. Now, when we go into these states, we've got to be very careful of our descriptive language, because the descriptive language makes the witness seem something apart from what is happening in such a way that if we want to become really sort of skitsy and catatonic about things, we can always be withdrawn and go in and identify ourselves with a solitary and uninvolved witness, who is merely a hangout for the ego, as when the police raid a house in which there are burglars. And the burglars know they'll be caught if they're on the ground floor, so they go up to the first floor. So then the police come up to the first floor, they're up to the second, finally they get to the roof, the open sky and the infinite. And in this way, this was why the Buddha did not teach about the Atman, the real self within us, because he knew people would use the real self as the hideout for the ego. And so, when say Krishnamurti tries to explain this, he doesn't talk about the witness. He talks about awareness, and people say to him, but who is aware? What is aware? And he seems a little sticky in his answer here, because what is the matter is that the people asking the question are bewitched by grammar. They are using a language in which it is part of the grammatical convention that the verb always have a noun subject. Now, how on earth do verbs get started by nouns? I ask you. How can a thing start a process? Surely, this is really the same problem Descartes was wrestling with when he tried to find out how spirit could influence matter, or how mind could influence body. Because everybody knows that all proper ghosts walk straight through walls without disturbing the bricks. So how can the ghost in the machine, as Koestler put it, the soul in the body, how can it do anything to the body? There's no connection. Two different realms. The point is that when we're talking about this awareness, what we call thought, feeling, sensation, emotion, we could say in a very clumsy way is it's aware of itself. It's the very nature. There wouldn't be sensation without awareness. You don't have to have something which is aware of it, any more than you have to have a thing called lightning, which does something called flashing. The flashing is the lightning. And so awareness is the one who's aware of it. Would say this awareness, if I say I am aware, the word I, as William James suggested, is simply a word of position, like this or here. Awareness here. And your awareness there. Yes, sir.
Right. When we
Yes, life is like one great koan. No, death is not the solution. It has no solution. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. You see, the thing is like this. This is what is hard for Westerners especially to understand. I said, if you understand the yang and the yin, you don't need to ask any further questions. And all you I Ching buffs ought to know this by now. What is not a component of Western common sense is that nothing is something. Now that may sound a little contradictory, but I think I can explain it. We treat nothingness as if it were ineffective, as if it wasn't really important at all. And yet, when we look out at the night and we see all these stars in space, try and imagine what the heavens would look like if there weren't any space. Then obviously there wouldn't be any stars. I mean, you could think that they would all be jammed together in a lump. There are various objections to that. How would you see the edge of the lump and know it was a lump without space around it? Furthermore, we know when we investigate the constitution of matter physically, that at the atomic level, there's more space in something than there is anything else. Most of it is empty, and which led a physicist at the Argonne lab at the University of Chicago, who had become a little nutty. He was so impressed with the emptiness of matter that he went around in the most enormous padded slippers in case he should fall through the floor. So now what the point I'm making is this. If space is essential to solid, it's perfectly obvious then that nothing is essential to something. If you can't have something without nothing, it means nothing is pretty powerful stuff. Because something comes out of it. Like that. It's a dogma of Western thought expressed in the Latin phrase ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. But that's not so. Out of nothing comes something. Now you would say, well, if something comes out of nothing, there must be some kind of mystery inside nothing. It must have a secret structure of some kind. I mean, there must be sort of electrical goings on. This is the trouble they have about cosmology. How could this world generate? Could it just be out of free-floating hydrogen? No, it's just a much simpler idea than that. It comes out of real, solid nothing. It's so simple.
You've been listening to Alan Watts in On Being God, delivered in New York City in 1971. It's from our Philosophy and Society series, and to download this and other similar recordings, please visit alanwatts.org. Today's broadcast was brought to you by the Ram Dass Be Here Now podcast network. Thanks for
Just our being together here is such grace. So much blessing for one birth. And just as last evening, Hari described how as Larry, with a sore leg from a fall during a morning ritual under LSD. And despite the subway ride, and despite the fact that nobody would join him to go, he still found himself
going to hear Swami Satchidananda in New York City, and he said he was already working on me, that he could overcome my tamasic nature to get me to go through all that to get to him. You certainly cannot believe any less at this moment that forces are afoot in every one of our lives that brings us here. It is not by chance that we happen to meet. And it's interesting to examine that chance occurrence, because it's certainly easy at the moment when it's all beautiful to say, what grace, what a blessing. Certainly the Guru is smiling upon me to have allowed me to have satsang again. The reason it's worth examining is to see if the concept of some overriding plan can become such a dominant theme in our consciousness that when the drama changes, when the melodrama gets heavy, when you've just fallen from the tree, you can equally say, what grace. Oh, thank you. Swami Ramdas is reported to have said, when he had been thrown out of a temple one night and had to sleep by the riverbank where the mosquitoes were particularly fierce, and thus he couldn't sleep at all, he kept saying, oh, thank you, Ram, for coming in the form of mosquitoes to keep me awake so I could remember you. In the Ramayana, there are two places in the Tulsidas version where Ram makes it very clear that unless one honors Shiva, one cannot come to Ram. Now, Ram is an incarnation of Vishnu, generally connected with the preserving and maintaining and very loving and supportive forces in the world. Shiva, on the other hand, is often connected, associated with the chaotic or destructive or unpredictable, or what are often called the malevolent forces. Ram says, unless you honor Shiva, you cannot come to me. There's a temple right at the very tip of India called Rameshwaram. It's where Ram did puja to Shiva before going across to Ceylon, to Sri Lanka, to rescue Sita, his wife. It's interesting to reflect on what does it mean to honor Shiva. so easy when you get high in a situation, whether it's satsang or whatever, meditation, and you say, oh, I feel the presence. I'm being given grace. But what about when you're despairing and you don't feel the presence? You think that's any less grace? Last night, Hadi said one thing which I guess I disagree with the sort of attitude that he reflected. He said he was doing karma yoga a lot because he guessed he was just too gross to do any other form of yoga. Now, I must say that I shared that opinion about karma yoga. When I went to India last time in 1970, I went in order to meditate, in order to get holy. I had been lecturing and teaching in America and doing whatever my hypocritical poor light would allow. And my own hypocrisy overwhelmed me, and it drove me back to the feet of my guru. I was just drunk for satsang. I was hooked. I needed to get back to my connection. And my plan was to check in with him, get his blessing, and then go to a cave, which he would bless me to do. This was my mind, okay? And there I would sit with his blessing, and I would meet Babaji, and I would meet Buddha, and I would meet Christ, and I would hang out with the astral team, and they would give me all the secrets, and maybe I'd go north to the edge of Tibet, and I would get some deep teachings from the Tibetans, and I would take deep meditation practices on various visualization exercises. I might even be walled into a building for 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, 3 hours, 3 minutes, and 3 seconds. And I thought, when I come back to America next time, boy, it's going to be different. I'm not going to be just a phony yogi. I'll be really the real thing. And I went to, with the group that was together at that time, I went to Bodh Gaya, where Buddha got enlightened. Seemed like a good place to start because I couldn't find my guru because he was, as he is wont to do. So we all enrolled in these courses, these 10-day courses, and we took a series of them. And it was very intense and very austere. And we learned how to cheat and cut corners, but it still was pretty fierce. And there was no doubt that some headway was made in that meditation. But after about 4 of the courses, I could see that the slippage was increasing considerably. And the thing that was missing was that my heart was very dry in that situation. I couldn't open my heart. And just at that time, I had been invited to Shivaratri with Swami Muktananda in Delhi. And I thought, wow, a good Shiva festival that'll really get me moving again. But I didn't really want to just walk out of the meditation because I felt that's kind of a cop-out. I mean, here I came to meditate and I'm walking out, to go dance and sing. Like any sloppy bhakti would do. So I entered into an arrangement with the most essence meditation teacher that during the monsoon, I found out where he would be up in the mountains, and we went and made a survey. We went up there in advance, and we found another house that would hold 3 people, and we rented and had to fix up the house, put a new roof on, a new water system. Got the house all ready, and I arranged that when he went off for the summer, for the monsoon, summer monsoon, 3 of us would go, and we would be with him, 4 of us, 3 or 4 of us. And we would just get all this intense training in meditation. And I thought, well, as long as I've organized and prepared for it, now I can go dance and sing, because I do my sort of sloppy stuff, because I'm really going to do the work later. Well, on the way to Shivratri, it turned out that we met Maharaji, my guru. And in my puffed up pride, I said to him, like a good little boy reporting his work, I said, I've arranged for this teacher and this house, and I'm going to meditate. And I told him this whole story with a question mark at the end, like, aren't I good? Or isn't that wonderful? Or isn't this just what you want? And his answer was, if you desire it. Well, that left me hanging. Because what he was saying is, you want an ego trip? Go ego trip. Now, I couldn't understand that. What self-respecting guru would say that meditation was ego tripping? I mean, that seemed like the height of profanity, yogic profanity. So I thought, well, he's just a silly old man, and he doesn't really understand. And maybe he's saying something much more profound that I'll only understand later after I've meditated. So I'm going to do it anyway, I said, humbly. So when the time arrived, I went up there, and I was so happy to get to this place because up until then, everywhere I'd gone, there were always Westerners, and it turned out I was always hanging around Westerners who, and after all, you don't go to India to hang out with Western consciousness. And I was always hanging around Westerners who were looking to me for something or other, which seemed absurd. I mean, they come to the well to drink, and then they're looking for polluted water they brought from the city. I mean, it's so bizarre. But there's a certain culture shock in India, and it's nice to have something to cling to, and I was sort of it. So I went to the mountains, and I was so happy. I was finally away from all of them. Right? And that draggy having to be with them and answer and deal with the stuff all the. And I put away all the musical instruments and all the bhakti schmaltz, and I was going to settle down for serious business that was going to bring me to God. You got the set of the mind? Well, when I arrived there, within about 2 or 3 days, Westerners, other than the 3 people that had been invited, started to trickle in. First 3, then 5, then 8, then 11, till there were about 20 others. And they all said, I said, what are you doing here? Because I thought we were hiding out and we kept it really secret. And they all said, well, Maharaji sent us. He said, go be with Ramdas. So we took over a hotel in the town. But I stayed up in the house with the group up there, and I wouldn't have anything to do with the people down there. I said, look, if you're in the town, that's up to you, but I'll come down and visit every week, but that's all. I don't want anything to do with any of you. I'm here for serious business. Well, then, another week went by, and the teacher didn't show up. And a letter comes from him saying, "Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond my control, I will not be able to come this summer." Now I could see whose big hand was behind that. There wasn't any doubt about that. So we arranged to take over the Gandhi ashram in the town. We all moved into the ashram, and we ended up having an ashram for the summer. We all disciplined ourselves. We read the Ramayana and fasted and meditated and lived in silence. We had a very profound, good summer together. Very beautiful, holy place. Okay, now the next component in that training program that is an answer to Hari's point last night was when I got to India this last time, when I was with my guru. He said, "Who do you want to see when you're in India?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to see Anandamayi Ma, because to see the mother, to have the darshan of the mother, wow. He says, "Acha, that's good. Who else?" I said, "I don't want to see anybody else, just you." So he said to me, "See Lama Govinda." I said, "Lama Govinda?" I said, "I've already seen Lama Govinda." I said, "He's a very nice man. He's a good German scholar. He's a wonderful Lama, and that's lovely. He's written some incredibly good books. But you know," and he says, "See Lama Govinda." So that was that. So I kept stalling. And then I heard that he was going to be leaving for Dallas. So Krishna Das, who's going to be playing the drums with me this afternoon, and Annapurna and I went over to visit Lama Govinda. Just to put a little flesh on the bones, just to give you a little feeling for the little divine play in the whole dance. Let me tell you the story in the rich way, rather than the bare bones part. Because the means and the ends are one, by the way, so there's no conclusion in anything I say. It's just like hamburger, it just keeps coming in. We had included a picture of my guru and Lama Govinda in the Be Here Now production. And in the picture was also Lee Gautami, Lama Govinda's Shakti, his wife. And she had taken the picture on an automatic camera, and we had cut her off in the one we had used in the book. And since we were not acknowledging anybody's contributions, we didn't acknowledge that she had taken the picture. And since all her pictures had stamped on the back of them, taken by Lee Gautami, we knew she might have a slight investment in this matter. And I expected to get a little flack from her about this when I should see her. Now, there was a little additional matter that Lama Govinda had written a letter to an editor of Newsweek in Chicago, who had photostated it and sent it on to me, in which he said, "These Westerners go to India and they take the first guru that comes along. They're so hot to get a guru. Take Dick Albert." He went and he got hooked up with his second-rate mind reader. So now I knew that. So I figured if Lee Gautami gives me any trouble about the picture, I will discuss second-rate mind readers, but otherwise I won't do it. See, I mean, I'm not going to just start out with, I just have a little thing in Restore. Yogi Love, it's just the social dance. So the time came for taking pictures. which it does at most of Lama Govinda's scenes. And I said, well, I'll stay inside. We'll stay inside. You go ahead. And Lee Gotami says, no, you're going to be in the picture too. I'm going to get back at you for... oh, she just did it. So as we were standing posing for the picture, Lama Govinda and I, with some other people, I turned to him and I said, do you really think he's a second-rate mind reader? That's all. I just looked right at him. Well, he went through just long enough to go through the chain to realize that he had just been had. And he lit up, and we looked at each other with total love. We had just broken through all the formalities, you know. And from then on, our relationship was totally joyful. So that evening, the five of us sat together after the other guests had left, and his mind was beautiful. It was like an exquisite crystal, like a beautiful jewel, very clear mind. Now, he represented to me the kind of meditative jnana yoga, the intellect and meditation aspects of yoga, which to me have always been the manly, tough forms of yoga, see, as opposed to the bhakti and karma things, which are what you do if you can't do anything else. See, if your mind's too gross to do anything else. So I said to him, Lama Govinda, what is it you want me to do? Do you want me to go and to study, do visualizations? What is it you'd like now? What kind of Maharaj, he sent me to you. He must have sent me to you for teaching. I now take you as my teacher. Tell me what to do next. I said, I can go on with my Southern Buddhist meditation or my Northern, go into Northern Buddhism. I've been interested in the Nyingma-pa, and I can go on with my Padmasambhava mantra, or what do you suggest? I sat as a seeker. And he said, no, you don't understand at all. He said, I've looked at your book and all that. He said, your path, your path is the path of the heart. And he said, your heart is opening. It's all happening to you. You don't have to do anything. Now he said that, and I wouldn't hear it, see. I said, oh, I know all that. But tell me, what should I do? See? Because you certainly couldn't assume you don't do anything. And he says, no, you don't understand. He said, you're doing your path already. So now, coming from him, see, I mean, it's one thing if a bhakti says to you, go be bhakti. You say, sure, he's protecting his own investment. But when Lama Govinda, he's got to go against everything he ever talks about, roughly, to tell me to do that when I've asked him for teaching. So in a way, it was incredible that Maharaji would send me to Lama Govinda to get him to tell me that my yoga, see, was bhakti. That was part of it, bhakti. So I began to reassess. You know, bhakti yoga took on a new dimension for me now. I mean, it was going to be respectable. So later when I was sitting with Maharaji, I would say to him things like, Maharaji, how do you awaken Kundalini? I mean, just a question in the passing of the day, you know. And he'd say, feed everybody. Feed everybody. I mean, I'm ready for pranayam and vastrika, belong. Feed everybody. Maharaji, how do I get finished? Love everyone. And all he kept instructing me was, and all of us, was love, serve, remember. Love, serve, remember. Now, I couldn't help but break up over the cosmic joke that that I should go to India, to the deep, dark, mysterious East, to learn the secrets that will bring man to final realization, to bring them back home to the primitive tribes in the outer lands. Right? And I come back bearing the gift of 3 words: love, serve, and remember, which have already been hanging around here for years, as I seem to recall Christ reminding us. And in the 2 years I was in India, I think in total, there were 14 days when I was not surrounded with Westerners, doing exactly the same thing I do in the United States. So what I was forced to recognize was I was forced to do what we call a figure ground reversal. Because what I saw hanging out and talking about God with people as was what you do until you do the real thing. And now I had to flip it over and see that maybe that was the real thing. And all the other things were support systems. Now, faced with the possibility that the rest of this incarnation, or at least at this time, my dharma was to do karma yoga and bhakti yoga, I started to examine the nature of these yogas a little more carefully, since I was stuck with them, apparently. And I must say, I shared that little tone of that quality in the way Hari put that, although I'm not attributing to him that he shares that opinion, but the tone that I got from the way he said it. But you're so gross, you just do karma yoga. It's sort of, we used to think of very gentle paths, like going to church on Sunday is a very gentle path. Then there are steep paths like Zen Buddhism, where you just sit and think of nothing. And most people can't stand that because that's too steep. They need a support system like a god or something or a church or a ritual to cling to. And there are these different steepnesses of path. And karma yoga has always been connected with doing good, gray ladies serving in hospitals, and, sort of a nice, gentle way to come to God over the next 10,000 incarnations. So a deeper study of the Bhagavad Gita, which of course is the text for karma yoga, among other yoga. And I entered full steam into karma yoga. Figured, well, if it's my yoga, then I'll do it. Now, when I came back to America in 72, I was living not in time. I was going to live like my guru lives. He's just somewhere until he isn't there anymore, and then he goes somewhere else. You never know when he'll be there or when he won't. I figured I'll live outside of time, because time was really scaring me about the West. Schedules, and you got to lecture. Like, you got to lecture Thursday night at 8, like Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And many hundreds of people are going to be expecting your consciousness to get them off at 9 o'clock on Saturday. So everything you did Friday night, everything you did Thursday, Friday, if you had a lustful thought on Wednesday, that was going to affect Saturday morning. So you had to watch it, and you had to get so programmed. And if you had 2 a week, it wiped out the whole week. You had to just sort of sit like in a straitjacket to just stay together enough. And I was like, time was my enemy. I was always like afraid to let go. So I thought, look, I'm not going to live in time. I'm just going to live. I'll just be where I am. People would call me from New York to New Hampshire, and they'd say, will you be there tomorrow afternoon? I want to come see you. Meaning, will you be holy tomorrow afternoon at 2? I'd say, I don't know. They'd say, well, what do you mean you don't know? Say, well, I don't know where I'll be tomorrow afternoon. Meaning not only I don't know where I'll be geographically, but I don't know where I'll be in terms of my consciousness, because my consciousness, unlike Swamiji's consciousness, is not nice and even and smooth and together. I'll tell you, I'm not going to be the only one to do karma yoga this morning. I'll tell you that. My mind is a little bit like a roller coaster, and it's not any roller coaster that you ride the same route each time. Each time it's a different route, so you can't tell if you felt you get really very. It's all pouring through you, and everybody looks at you and they see the highest light, and you say, "Oh boy, all I got to do is keep cool, and this is the way it's going to be." You know, and I can just be the transmitter, and so you make a plan for tomorrow at 3. Tomorrow at 3 comes and somebody drives up the driveway and you think, oh God, do I have to see them? Oh God. You know, I want to see Perry Mason on television. I want to see Now, I don't want to see Perry Mason, but I do want to see Perry Mason, see? Because I want to see Perry Mason, I hate these people driving up the driveway. And I don't want to hate them because I'm a holy man. I want to love them, but I hate them. So I thought, okay, I'm going to change all that. I'm only going to be holy when I feel holy, right? People come and I don't feel like seeing them, I'll say, go away. Or I'll just disappear. Or whatever. You know, I just won't be holy unless I feel like being holy. And when I'm holy, I'll be really holy. Because I was tired of being a phony holy man. Because if they're driven from Ohio, see? And they come to see Ram Dass. And they walk in, and you wait the last minute, turn off the television set, and you rush up. And you light an incense and candle, and you sit down. And they come in and you say, welcome. Well, that kind of hypocrisy, you can only live with yourself so long. I mean, it's just too heavy. It's just too ugly. You know, it's just too horrible. So, and my guru had kept saying to me, tell the truth. Tell the truth, Ram Dass. He kept catching me not telling the truth. That was really little things, you know. I'll just give you a little quick example. I mentioned this in lectures in the past. Once I won't tell the whole story, just a little part of it. A judge, a high Supreme Court official from Uttar Pradesh came to have Maharaji's darshan. And we were sitting on the outer rim, the Westerners, and the Indians were in close. And which alternated from day to day. And Maharaji gave this high court official a tremendous buildup about what an important man I was in America, which he had never done, and I never even thought that it was remotely relevant to anything he and I did together. He's an ex-professor at the university, you know, and he just full of lies, all incredible stuff. And he snowed the official. You know. Finally, the official, with great awe, really, because turned around and he said, well, I'm honored to meet you. I said, well, how do you do? He says, perhaps you'd like to visit the High Court. Now, in truth, I had no desire whatsoever to visit the High Court. I come from a family of lawyers. I've been in courts, and I didn't go to India for that particular trip. So I said to him, well, that would be very nice. So he said, well, tomorrow at 10? So I thought, uh-oh. So I said, well, you'll have to ask my guru. figuring he'll get me off the hook. So he says, Maharaji, can Ramdas visit the High Court tomorrow at 10? Maharaji says, if he says it'll be very nice, it'll be very nice. So he's pointing like this, like, watch it, baby. Tell the truth. Just little ones, little social, those little white ones, you know, those don't hurt anybody, you know. There was a woman with him one day, and he came up and he said, do you remember her? And I said, oh, yes, and I didn't. And he said, yes, she's Dada's sister-in-law. And Dada's from Allahabad. So I said, oh, yes, we met in Allahabad. She says, no, we met right here. I said, oh. Maharaji went like that. It's just these little ones he was always getting me at. You know, like, tell the truth, babe. Come on, tell the truth. Truth gets you high. Tell the truth. So I thought when I came back to America, I'll just be straight. If I'm not feeling high, I won't make believe, you know. I was trying to get very, very straight. Okay, so it came, I sort of floated around the country just being wherever I was, and when I felt really together and like it was clear and I was calm and centered and loving and had something to offer, I was with people and it was beautiful. And I could feel Guru's grace coming through on people, and then when I wasn't, I just went off and, you know, read and studied. Then I decided, I had just done 4 or 5 lectures with Allen Ginsberg as benefits for Trungpa Rinpoche, and I decided those were in time, and those were the first things I had done in time. And then I thought I'd go into a retreat for a month. So I rented a cabin in Tucson, Arizona, in the mountains south of it, which had a kitchen, refrigerator, stove, beds. It was a bird estuary, so there were lots of bird lovers. Those were the only people there, me and bird lovers, so I was not relevant in their universe. So it was a certain kind of privacy, even though there were other cabins. I walked into this place and found, to my dismay, that the one other thing that the cabin had was a television set. Now, I had gone in to do a prayer. I was going to do a prayer for 30 days. Which was the Sutra of the Third Chinese Patriarch of Zen, which is just a little tiny booklet, and I was just going to work with that for 30 days. But I spent the first 8 days, roughly 12 hours a day, looking at television. Now, after I looked at television for the first day, see, I was so horrified that I might spend the next 29 doing it, that I took a screwdriver out of my car and I unwired the television set. And I put it in the closet. And I put a blanket over it. Put it way behind my bag and everything. And I closed the door and I sat down. And around 5:30, I thought, well, I could just look at the news. So I took the television set out, wired it up again, looked at the news, and suddenly it was 1 in the morning. Right? Three or 4 cans of beer later. Now, it's very hard to think of that as sadhana. However, in that cabin, besides the television set and all the food that I had filled the refrigerator with, and the bed and the bathtub that I could take frequent baths in, and all the different ways I could play in my sensual delights, there was also my consciousness sitting in that cabin saying, far out. Imagine that, you know? You gonna tell anybody about this one? I mean, sitting me with that guy that said, gee, I think if I take the broccoli and put some of that spaghetti sauce over it, it'll be, and bake it, it'll be just like a pizza. And oh boy, and if I do, and then I can quick get that done quick so I can watch Kung Fu and, That guy was doing his thing, and this other voice was saying, far out. Maharaji was saying, teep, teep. That's the way it is. Okay, right. Okay. There was the voice in me that was sitting watching all this, just noticing it, witnessing it, watching with, at first, horror. See? Because when you meet Shiva in yourself, you are horrified. When you meet him anywhere, he's really scary. In the Shiva Stotram, it says, when Shiva dances, the beings in all three worlds tremble. In all three worlds tremble, because his dance is so violent. And when I'm sitting in there with the television set, I get in this funny predicament. I get the food ready just as the program began. This particularly happened to me not long ago when the Watergate hearings started. See, Watergate, even more than my orality, is watching Watergate, okay? And I was sitting with the Watergate hearings just began, and I had the food, but I couldn't eat the food till I consecrated it. But I couldn't stop watching Watergate long enough to consecrate it. And if I didn't consecrate it quick, the food would get cold, okay? I mean, you can't look at television and go, I mean, it's just too shoddy, I mean, you're faced with these real dilemmas, right, in doing sadhana. And I think you should recognize that this is where it really hurts, This is where we live most of the time, unfortunately. Well, then the next week I managed to, I would just unplug the set and put a cloth over it. I wouldn't put it in the closet. And I found I was getting a little bored, so I was only looking at television 3 or 4 hours a day. And then I got into feeding birds and studying bird names and things like that. By the third week, I was sitting a little quieter and deepening a little bit, and I could sit by the river for a few hours, and I was starting to eat more simpler food, and I was losing interest in television. And by the fourth week, I was really in pretty calm, centered space, and I was starting to feel that energy again. I was getting that place that you get when you've been here for 9 days. That connectedness, that, that's what it's like. Wow, boy, this is the real, you all know, I'm sure. Well, while I was in there, I looked at the whole scene and I thought, really, if I'm going to do karma yoga, I really should just go into it, And I had a big folder of places that had invited me to speak. And I just kept them in a folder and wrote back saying, I don't do that kind of thing, but if I ever do, I'll let you know. Benefits and lectures and all kinds of stuff. So I said, okay. I got the inner message because I live totally intuitively now. Because of what we in the West call intuition, I would call the voice that's guiding me from within. And sometimes my intuition is a reflection of certain of my desires, and sometimes it's a reflection of a deeper voice. And I never know which one it is. And sometimes it tells me to do something, and I start to do it, and then it turns out it was just another ego trip, and it falls away. I see its impurity. And sometimes I start to do it, and it feels right on, go, 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 and I just stay right in this space as I'm doing it. And I know, right, that's right on. It's all a hunt and peck process of learning to hear that inner voice, because you can't hang on the coattails of the guru every minute saying, Swamiji, what do I do now? Should I sharpen this pencil now? Should I sit? What shall I do now? When I was coming to America, I said to Dada, Maharaji's devotee, I said, Dada, you're lucky. You hang around Maharaji. If you do something wrong, he's always telling you, do this, do that. He said, look at me. I'm, thousands of miles away. I can really go off the deep end, and I don't mind doing myself in karmically, but I don't really like doing other people in. That's a heavy, And I can do that because I have a lot of lust left and stuff, and I may manipulate the whole game just to make it with somebody. I don't trust me at all. See? And he went to Maharaji and he told Maharaji this. Maharaji sent back the message, Ram Das shouldn't worry. I wouldn't let him do anything wrong. Now, how does he not let you do anything wrong? Do you think suddenly a little angel comes fluttering in and says, stop, like in fairy tales? Or... No, it's the guy sitting in that cabin in Tucson saying, more kung fu. More beer, more baths, more, wow, yeah, right. It's that place in me that knows, and it's just letting me do what I need to do as I'm getting closer there, and it never lets me out of its sight. To let you in on the secret of the game from where I'm sitting perceptually, the universe that I live in has only two beings left in it. There is who I still think I am. Who I think I am. Okay, that's the illusion. And there's, Sam. You can call Sam God, or you can call Sam Guru, or you can call Sam whatever you like. I call it Guru. And as far as I can understand it, my universe, the universe of the illusion of who I think I am, exists solely for the purpose of bringing me to it, to the Guru. That is, that everything that is happening to me, that has happened to me, or that could happen to me, is a teaching being given to me as grace to bring me to the Guru. Not just sitting in satsang, but tripping on the rock as you walk down the path. It's all of it, the teaching, if you can flip around and see it that way. Now, under those conditions, karma yoga takes on quite a different aspect. As I point out in the brief time that's left to me by my inner clock. So deciding to do this tour, I decided, all right, I'm really going to do it to myself. I mean, if you're going to do karma yoga, really do it. Don't just screw around, do it. So I took a big map and I laid out all these lecture dates in terms of schedule and geography, and I got to the point where I had scheduled myself to lecture in a different city every night, right, for 2 months, and then in the third month I started to loosen up a little bit. So I was only doing, say, 1 every 3 nights. So I started and I went up the coast of California and Washington, Seattle, and Portland, Olympia, Seattle. Everywhere I went, either Swamiji had just been or was about to be, it turned out. I get to a place and they'd say, you know who slept in this bed last night? But the difference between us is he doesn't do it as karma yoga, he's just doing it. Because he is it. He is the statement of the yoga. And I understood that's what karma yoga is about. Not to say I am serving, but to become the service. You become here's what happens. See, I started out, and every night, here's the routine. Every day, you get up, have your morning which is what I said last night, which for me is coffee. Sometimes a bagel. Okay, then you go to the airport. You go through security, open your bags. You go and you get on an airplane and you sit in the airplane for so many hours. The plane lands, you get off the plane, you walk down the runway, gangplank, and you walk, whatever it is, and you walk into the hall, and there are these beings saying, oh, Ramdas, and you say, how do you do? And they take you, you pick up your bag, they take you to where you're staying. You either do some press conferences or radio stuff or meet a group, and then at 3 o'clock I take a nap because I say to everybody I have hepatitis and I have to protect my liver, and I go to nap for a few hours, then I get finished. Then there is dinner, which is usually some kind of a satsang gathering, very beautiful potluck thing somewhere, and we all get together. It's very lovely. Around 7:30, move to the lecture hall. I sit down, tune up the tambura or get the shruti box ready, whatever it is. Work with the musicians that have gathered to help me out. 8 o'clock I start. At 11 or 12 I stop. I'm delivered back to the hotel or motel or room. I take my peanut butter and crackers and my milk, drink that, look at the late news, go to bed, get up the next morning, meditate for a few minutes, have my coffee, go to the airport, go through security, get on the plane, get off the plane, pick up my bag, say hello, namaste. Have you got the microphone? I prefer a mini boom because I have a beard, and when the lavalier is there, you can't hear through the beard. Oh, yes, I understand. I need a cushion because yes, of course, take the rest, go have supper, go to the lecture. Next morning, get up, have your coffee, go to the airport, go through security. It's no different than working a lathe, see? You know, every day you get up and you lecture. Now, what happens is, I saw that the only way to survive, I started to get sicker and sicker and sicker, first of all, because the schedule was grueling. And by the time I got to Vancouver, I didn't have any voice, which was funny. I mean, I was about to head for Anchorage, Alaska, and I didn't have any voice left to speak. And I was sitting over a hot vaporizer and, doing the whole thing, mantra and everything. I was saying to Maharaji, what do you have in mind now? It's pretty far out. How am I going to speak without a voice? And he had said to me in India, he says, there's going to come a time when you're not going to want to lecture anymore. And I kept repeating that to myself, and I kept saying, this must be the time. But I still wanted to do it. Because quite honestly, what I'm working with is power and fame and all these worldly things that are connected with exactly when Swamiji said, who doesn't know Ramdas? Of course, everybody applauds. And what am I supposed to go through then? Like it's... Like if 40 people come to see me at a day in the farm in New Hampshire, I get stoned out of my head from the satsang, and I walk in and my father says to me, had a pretty good crowd today. Like he's counting cars, see? I mean, that's the cultural background that I come out of, And I've got to work with that all the time. That's my work. You got to understand what karma yoga really is. It's working with your desires right in the middle of the fire, right in the field. It's dying into the thing. It's dying into the service. So that I realized that the only reason I was getting fatigued and wiped out and physically run down was because I still wanted something. Like after a beautiful satsang, I'd be just hardly in my body. I'd just be sort of floating around, and we'd all be staying. Nobody wanted to go home, that place where nobody wants to sleep. Somebody would come up and say, I have a beautiful place just a few miles out of town, and there'll be about 10 of us, and we'll cook a beautiful thing. Why don't you come on back now? It's around 12 o'clock at night. Now, I know if I go back, that's at least till 4 in the morning. Next morning, there's the airplane, the security, the coffee. That's not going to change. So I realized that as long as I desired to go, and I'd say to them, I wish I could go, but I can't. And I remembered, that's what I hated about time. Time kept making me turn off life. And then I thought, no, So time is merely making me turn off my desires. All I have to do is just desire to become the pure instrument of service, that's all. I'm going to become like one of those 747 planes. Not like the pilot, but like the plane. Somebody gets in the plane and moves it from here to here. It doesn't say, oh boy, I'm flying to New York. Or I bet I'll be big in Denver. You know, it's just an airplane. You move it from here to there and it does its thing. It goes, and it just flies. And I recognized that for me to understand the exquisiteness of karma yoga was going to mean that I could do this every single day until there was nobody doing it at all. It was just being done every day. So every day there was just the moving, the flying, and it was all silent. There wasn't one tiny bit of it. You come up to the security guard and the guard sees you as a potential bomber. You know, that's Maharaji. That's my guru, who's just taken through central casting, gone to the costume department, and he's come out as the guard, and he's saying to you, well, see if you can see through me this time. Do you know I'm God in here, or do you think I'm a security guard? Are you so paranoid that you're busy reacting, saying, I'm not the bomber, I'm not the bomber? I'm a nice guy. And everybody I meet every day is the guru in drag, as far as I'm concerned. Okay? And the sickness and the fatigue and all of it is the grace. It's all the grace. It's all the grace. It's all the grace. There is nothing left in my life other than teachings that are going to bring me to God. It's the only game in town. Nothing else has any meaning. What else am I going to make meaningful? Just as I make it meaningful, like I'm busy watching the Watergate. I can't wait for the team to get on the stand, you know. And at the same moment, I'm sitting inside saying, you can't wait for Dean to get on the stand. Because let me tell you that once that thing has happened enough to bring you into this room, as far as I'm concerned, it's all over. Now it's the mopping up operation, which may take many lifetimes. It's all purification from here on out. It's just cleaning up. It's getting your body together, getting your heart open, getting your mind calmed down. And understanding that a conscious being recognizes that she or he has taken birth, and the function of an incarnation is to end suffering. And that means wherever it exists, on any plane it exists at. And you recognize that the optimum thing you to do to end suffering is to work on yourself. And how you work on yourself depends on your dharma. What is your route through? And for me, my work on myself is through doing what I'm doing this minute. If I think I'm doing this, I still got a way to go. Until this is just being done, and I'm just as much part of the audience as you are. Am I attached to being the speaker? Am I looking for the rush of your appreciation? Now, the honoring of Shiva, it's now 5 minutes past. I will allow us 5 more minutes. The honoring of Shiva, it's easy when you talk about Shiva, you know, over there in India, with his ashes and his, you know, all his buddies he hangs out with are so scary, you know, and his wife, oh my God, Kali, wow, jeez, far out. That's easy. Then you can bring it over here and you say, well, like, look at pollution and look at lying and stealing in government, and look at murder and paranoia and rape and but get a little closer still when you're ready. And realize that in you are all those forces as well. The Bhagavad Gita is talking about an inner battle. An inner battle. The battle between that voice that says kung fu and broccoli with some sauce on it. And the guy that says, I want to watch kung fu and I want to have the broccoli. That's the battle, those two guys. And that goes on and on and on and on, and everything you do, you know, when people come to me and they say, should I do this or do that? And I know that as a good yogi, I'm supposed to say good yogic things like, do this, or stand on your head, or something like that. But I must honestly admit, what I mainly say to people, it doesn't matter. Because whatever you do, you'll do as consciously or as unconsciously as you are. Do it all to bring yourself to God. Don't get caught in the form you're going to do it in. Just do it. And as you come closer to God, you find out, in fact, there are always certain things you can do, because you can't do things which increase illusion. You can't do things which increase suffering. You just can't do them because they're just too absurd. It's like taking needles and sticking them in your hands. Why are you going to do them? If I screw you, I'm just screwing myself. Who am I hurting? It's only us. That's where I'm sitting. I've got this little economic story that's fun. It's just a little fun image to play with. I've talked about before, my father heard that we were putting out some records very cheaply, and we were trying to lower prices of things and doing everything very economically, and that I was not trying to collect or amass money. And he says, what's the matter? Are you against capitalism? This is the ex-president of a railroad, right? So I said, no, Dad, I'm not against capitalism. For you, I think it's great. It's just not my style. He says, I don't understand you. I said, well, that I understand. It's interesting, we love each other incredibly, even though we're on different trips, because compassion doesn't mean you lay your trip on anybody else. It means you become it so perfectly that you become the light that draws. You don't go out and say, come on, Dad, wake up. And I said, I'll try to share with you, since you don't understand, I'll try to explain. I said, didn't you just try a case for Uncle Henry? He's a lawyer. He says, yeah. I said, you win it? He says, damn right I did. It was a tough case. I said, boy, you worked a lot on it. He says, I sure did. I said, I bet you charged him a big fee. He says, of course not. It's my brother-in-law. I said, well, that's my predicament. Everybody's my brother-in-law. Like, who am I going to rip off? And he could hear that. See, he could hear that out of the Jewish middle-class background. He could hear family you do one thing with, and them you do something else with, see? And if he's Meshuggah enough, so the whole thing is his family, that's, you know, he's a good kid anyway, you know. In conclusion, when you leave this place and this blessing, this mitzvah, when you leave this, I can assure you that you will come down. And I can further tell you, although you may forget it, that that is as much of the teaching as this is. And the down and up is all part of the dance. And the game is not to get high, but the game is to be. And be includes highs and lows until you're no more attached to your high than you are to your low. There's bliss, there's depression. There it all is. There's the whole panorama of Maya. All the positive states and negative states. It's all more stuff. Divine stuff, the Leela. And in it all, here we are. Here we are. And the meaning of honoring Shiva is to give space to all these forces, to recognize them, to allow their being, to not try to shove them under the rug. There's a terrible habit we have of getting holy too fast. Intellectually, we know where holy is, and we figure out, well, I want to be like Swamiji, so I'll put on those clothes and I'll act like that. And you do it from outside in. You can't do this game from outside in. You can play at it, but you're going to keep that inner voice is going to keep being horrified by your hypocrisy. And then you say, well, I'm really nowhere. And the statement, I'm really nowhere, is the recognition of being somewhere. That is it. See, people come to me and say, I'm no good, I'm depressed, or I hate everybody. And I said to them, well, if you hated everybody, you wouldn't tell me you hate everybody. It's that story I've told about. I am now 2 minutes over because I have lack of self-control. It's nearly over. It's okay. I'm nearly right on. Some years back at Millbrook, a girl called in the middle of the night, and she had taken some mysterious chemical and in Los Angeles, and she was freaked. And she called up and she got me in the line. She said, I've gone crazy, and I'm going to kill myself, and I'm insane. And she laughed hysterically, and she did it. She showed me she was insane. And I said to her, well, who dialed the phone? You know, the 4 digits and the 3 digits and the 3 digits and the 1 digit, and gave a number and the whole thing. She said, I did. I said, well, would you put her on the phone? Because you're crazy. So let me say that once you have tasted, once you've touched, once the connection's been made, once we have acknowledged each other's existence, once we know we're here, you can't get away. You can't get away. You may go under really deep and feel, I've lost it. And then you'll see yourself standing there, I've lost it. And you'll break up. Oh, have I lost it? Oh, am I depressed? You know. You get bored. Oh, I'm bored. Oh, I'm so bored. Oh, I'm bored. See, and then you let yourself be bored. Oh, I'm still bored. Still bored. I'll try to meditate. Now I'm bored with that. Now I'm bored. I'm bored. Oh, I'm so bored. Oh, and everything's boring. Nothing's. Oh, yeah. And then you become totally bored. And if you become bored, then it's done. Right? See, the game is if you're so afraid of all the Shiva forces, you keep pushing them away. They keep clinging. It's very interesting to use the golden chain to pull yourself out of the mud. What's called the Satwik chain of being good and pure and doing good and pure things. It's good to help you get out of a lot of other stuff. But remember, you're holding on to a chain, and that chain can bind too. And to get caught in good and evil, while you're using good and evil as a method, just remember that behind good and evil we are. Behind good and evil we are. Shiva and Ram are 2 more faces of that which is indescribable and unknowable and unseeable, but only beable. It's really very, very good to be with all of us. And I guess this afternoon, after a few more rounds of the drama, we will sing together. Namaste.
Well, this is the second of the Seasons of Our Lives conferences that I've attended. And I'm again impressed with Bill's courage in bringing together such a potpourri of presenters. While my vehicle is words, I don't really believe anything I say, because the nature of my work concerns the spaces between the words rather than the words themselves. For I'm dealing with an area, a realm of human existence that is basically not conceptual. And I'm faced with the predicament of trying to convey a non-conceptual realm through concept. So I must ask you at the outset to take my words with a grain of salt. If you don't like them, don't worry about them. They will pass quickly. In order to understand the stages of life and ultimately the process of dying, one has to have a context in which to understand these things. And the context usually is defined as what is the meaning of it? What am I doing here on earth? Because having an understanding of one's function or purpose makes one understand whether some process that's going on in transformation is functional or dysfunctional, whether or not it's useful or not. I mean, I think none of us are so naive at this point, certainly not in this gathering of professionals and people related in related fields. None of us are so naive as to think that only that which gives pleasure is useful. I think most of you now have found through your own experiences that there is incredible growth through suffering. That doesn't mean that we would go around programming suffering into people's lives. We don't give suffering 101, which is electrodes under. And yet, when we look back at our own lives, we see that some of the most profound changes occurred at the times of the most intense suffering. And the nature of the suffering is that we are confronting a situation which is dissonant or disparate from the model we have of how reality ought to be. And that's really what the cause of suffering is. The cause of suffering is this place in your mind that's defining how you think it ought to be. So if you think things should be a certain way and they're not, then there's a discomfort and you suffer. And a lot of what our suffering has been is not due to the actual characteristics of the situation, but to the way in which we perceive the situation. And that perception is based on our contextual understanding of who we are and what we're doing here. So that I must delve a little bit more into the philosophical underpinnings of your and my existence for us to have an appreciation of what the seasons of our lives, particular reference to dying, how to perceive them, how to understand them in a useful way. I'll paint a scenario that just give you a little example of what I went through in some of my processing. I'm in Benares, the city of dying in India. In the Hindu religion, the highest way in which you can die is to die in Benares. And when you die in Benares, your body gets burned at the burning ghat, and the bones and ashes get thrown into the Ganges River. And through that simple act, you are spiritually freed, and we'll talk a minute about what that might be about. The result of that belief system is that Benares is full of people dying. And most of these people have no money whatsoever. They are beggars at the most extreme states of survival. Many of them are lepers. They have a loincloth, man or woman, just a loincloth, and maybe a begging bowl. Many of them have advanced states of cancer. Many of them are just skin and bones. They are dragging themselves through the streets. And often on their loincloth, there is a little sack which contains the money necessary for the wood for their funeral pyre. Now, if you think of yourself as a human being and think of them as a human being and empathize for a moment with their predicament. Here we are in Orange County having just had a nice lunch and being in comfortable soft chairs. It's hard to imagine even identifying and realizing these are fellow human beings. But they are. They're just like us. They're just got a different place in their minds and they're in a different life moment. When I first came to Benares, when I went out in the streets, I was in a very open space. And when I looked at these people, I experienced such horror. I couldn't really handle it at all. And I went back to my hotel room and I am somewhat embarrassed to admit, I literally climbed under the bed. I hid under the bed, just in horror of the situation. Because I walked through the streets with my American Express traveler's checks in my pocket, with my security, with my ticket back to affluent America. And I was facing these other human beings in the extreme state of need and poverty. And my pity was more than I could handle. Subsequent to that, I met my spiritual teacher, and my whole life took a different turn. And I ended up living in a temple, studying Hindu philosophy, doing deep meditation, hatha yoga, and so on. And I began to understand a different context about what life and death was about. And now, about 8 months, 6 or 8 months later, I found myself in Benares again. And I walked through the streets. And this time, it was an entirely different experience for me. For when I looked into the eyes of these people, I saw in them not what I expected to see in the past, not self-pity, not frustration, not humiliation, not anger, not pleading. They had a look in their eyes of fulfillment. And then I noticed something else in their eyes that I could hardly believe. They were looking at me with pity. They were pitying me. Healthy, fat, solid American me. These people in the last stages of life were pitying me. And I understood that from their belief system, they were pitying me because I was merely this wanderer wandering through life, not knowing where I was going or where I was coming from. They knew their place. They were secure in their place. They were fulfilled in what they were about to do. And they knew that I was wandering in despair and I would never find, probably not find. And they just felt sorry that I was so lost. And I had trained enough so that I could see it from their point of view, and I ended up feeling self-pity. Now, to me, that's an example of how a belief system can be so strong that it can take what could be called a sad tune and make it into a happy tune. It can change the entire meaning of a situation. In the villages in India where I live quite a bit of the time, there are many beings who make 2, 3, 4 rupees a day. That's 40, 60 cents a day. And they have one meal a day, and they live maybe under a railroad bridge, crowded together. Not optimum living conditions. But sometimes when I look at their faces, I experience a being, a quality of their being that seems more in tune or in harmony with the universe than I find in the face of somebody who is affluent, successful, everything in the West. And I understand once I get over my arrogance of super race arrogance, that we have a great deal to learn about the dignity of the processes of life and death, the way of understanding them in a way to release us rather than to torment us. I have to digress briefly to just share with you my own sequence of perceptual shift a little bit so that you can appreciate the kinds of things I want to talk to you about. For I was trained as a social scientist. I was a professor. I was actually part of a junta at Harvard to protest against the soft and mushy conditions of the clinical social psychology department, social relations department. I was one of those guys in favor of harder statistics, the kind of guys you love, right? I just felt that anybody that didn't know how to do a factor analysis in a chi-square just hadn't yet awakened. And though I played that game as hard as I knew how, for all the points I knew how to collect, there was in me, despite my psychoanalysis, there was a very gnawing uneasiness that I was missing something, a malaise. And when we experience a malaise in our culture, we tend to treat that malaise as if it is our fault. We treat it as if it's our neurosis and it's our lack of adaptability to the existing culture, which must be right because there's so many of them. And I kept trying, like fitting a square peg into a round hole, I kept trying to readapt my being to fit into the gratification patterns that the culture was offering me. And it just wasn't working. And I started to drink more, and I started to get more extreme in my ways of seeking pleasure in order to gain the kind of fulfillment to give me a feeling of well-being. Well, then I got for some years into experimentation with psychotropic chemicals, chemicals that alter consciousness. And that changed my head around a great deal. I saw through those experiments that perhaps my malaise, my discomfort, was not just my pathology, but it was a deeper something in me attempting to awaken. And that maybe instead of treating it as some sickness that ought to be treated as a problem, I should see it as something graceful, to be honored. Maybe it would be useful to allow my life to adapt, to tune to those feelings of wrongness or rightness within myself. And I did that, and I just let my life go in the course it would naturally take, responding to an inner intuitive sense of, right, okay, that's all right. And it took me through, away from academia, it took me through psychedelic chemicals, it took me to India, it took me into yoga, and it brought me back to America, and it took me into a different kind of a perceptual view of the universe. And I found, much to my surprise, that through whatever had happened to me, had very profoundly, in the real sense of alteration, had profoundly altered my feelings about death, and as a result, my feelings about life. It had very profoundly altered the definition of who I think I am. Now, I could try to very gently take you into the space translating, but instead of doing that, I'm going to do a much more shock treatment process. I'm just going to tell you how I see the world. And many of you will say that is absolute rot. And that's perfectly okay. It's okay in advance. You have total license to reject it. But anything less than that would be dishonest on my part. So I'm going to go for broke. We'll let the chips fall where they will. Okay. I mean, I've convinced you I'm a nice person. I speak softly. I seem friendly. So now maybe we're ready for the as the blow fall. You knew I could sit cross-legged up here and not. And I'll even be more outrageous by telling you that what I'm presenting to you is not a belief system. It's the way things are. See, already your shackles are up. But what can I do? Anything less would be dishonest. I just got to play. You've got to know people like me exist. the extent that I am anything at all, and that we can open for question in a little while, seriously, we could consider me as a separate entity, a set of predisposing characteristics. You could call it would be like a DNA code, except we'll make it psychic instead of physical. I'm a set of characteristics, a program that is manifesting by taking a human birth at this time. I have taken a birth into a body, and that body has with it a personality. I've taken a birth into a personality, and that personality is in a body. And I am going through a set of experiences, which is called living life. And these experiences have a certain function. These experiences, if used consciously and intentionally by me, are vehicles through which I can awaken to who I am in truth. Let me take you through an example I often use, just another little metaphorical image and analogy. Imagine, for example, that you have next to your eyes a little control switch, and you look at another human being on channel 1. And what you see when you look at the other human being is a physical body. Man, woman, old, young, fat, thin, pretty, handsome, ugly, interesting. If you're a scientist, you might call them mesomorphs, ectomorphs, and endomorphs. Okay? It's a matrix of individual differences on physical plane. It's the plane of standing on the corner watching all the girls go by. It's that reality. Now let's just say you're looking at another person and you flick your television receiver one channel. Now you look at another person and what you see is their psychology. Oh, you're a manic depressive. Oh, you're a happy person. I wish I was happy like you. People in psychotherapy live on this channel usually. They see everybody in terms of personalities that just happen to be traveling in bodies. Okay. They're totally preoccupied with their own depressions, elations, fears, anxieties, loneliness, hopes, etc. And that's reality. That's the real you. And the physical body is merely the carrier of that. Well, let's flip it again. Flip it again and you look at another person, and if you are so trained to be able to see on this channel, you would say, oh, I know who you are. You're a Libra. I can tell because of the blue. You're a Sagittarius. On this channel, on channel 3, there's only 12 beings in the universe and various permutations of them. You are now seeing what could be known as the astral identity of an individual. You're seeing another plane of reality. You're seeing another way of looking at individual differences. These are 3 ways of looking at individual differences, 3 matrices, if you want. But now you flip the dial once more, it starts to get interesting. Now if you flip the dial and look into another person's eyes, you flip the dial inside your own being and look into another person's eyes, what you see is another being looking back at you. Inside an astral configuration, a personality, and a body. You in there? I'm in here. How did you get into that one? And you see what the Christians call soul. You see another soul. You see another being, just like you. No different, just like you, just another being. And that you see that all the individual differences are all of the stuff in which this being is encased. Now, you could almost be comfortable with that one, but we unfortunately must flick the dial a few more times. I mean, I must take you the whole journey. You flick the next dial, and what you see when you look into someone else's eyes is you see yourself looking at yourself, looking at yourself. Because on that plane, there is only one of it. It is one awareness that is in a multiplicity of forms. And finally, if you allow me to flip the dial just once more, if you haven't given up completely yet, you flip the dial once more, and you disappear, and I disappear, and the dial disappears, and we're dealing with what the Buddhists call void, or in the New Testament, before the word, that is, before the vibratory uniqueness, or why God is not able to be spelled in the Hebrew religion. It's unspeakable, unknowable, unseeable, unconceivable, inconceivable. Okay, now of all of these channels on the television set, who are you? Which one do you want to settle for? You want to be middle-aged? How about that one? I mean, I'm middle-aged. I guess I'm middle-aged. I have a 47-year-old body. It's like I have also a 1974 Dodge van. But you say to me, who are you? And I don't say I'm a Dodge van. Why do I choose to identify with this? Well, if I don't pick body, should I pick personality? I'm somebody on the path. That's a good one to be. I'm a curious person. I'm curious about the future. That's a good one. I'm a responsible person. Well, I'm kind of wild. I'm lazy. I'm working on myself. These are all different psychological takes of who one is. Each plane, each turn of the dial has a different statement of your identity, and each one is getting into a more and more profound place. Now when we come back to who am I, which channel are you talking about? If we start from the top and go on down into the grosser planes, I am the void who manifests as the one, who becomes the many, who has a unique set of factors to work out through a unique astral, psychological, and physical body. That's what I'm doing on Earth. I have taken a body to do certain work. And when I finish that work, I will drop that body. We are dealing here with the issues of karma and reincarnation. Now, in the West, after the councils of Trent, Constantinople, and Nicaea, anywhere from about 200 to 500 AD, these ideas were roughly thrown out of Christianity because they didn't make the church a workable situation. Because when you had reincarnation and karma, every human being became their own priest. Because it was between you and God. And for the church to keep its own control, it needed to and see its function as keeping people morally living properly. It had to get rid of those concepts. Have I taken birth before? I have no experiential knowledge of that. But from where I'm sitting, undoubtedly thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Will I take birth again? Undoubtedly thousands and thousands and thousands of times. I have to tax your brain with one more difficult concept. As long as we were dealing with your body, with your personality, with your astral identity, or with your soul, we were dealing in time. Time passes, things change. The minute we got up into the higher plane than that, in the one, there is no time anymore. Time is relative. Now we're dealing with a place where when you know yourself as that, you just are. You are going nowhere and you are coming from nowhere. The Zen master says your going and coming is nowhere but where you are. Now, if you can start to sense, and you don't have to believe what I'm saying, just because it's the way the universe looks to me, but if you could empathize just enough to appreciate how it would be to be looking at the world from this point of view. Here's a story that will explain that. I'll give you an example of it. Chinese were coming into Tibet, and they were very harsh on the Tibetan monks who they saw as part of the decadence of Tibet. And they were very cruel to the monks, and they were disemboweling them and shaming them and killing them. And one particularly vicious commander of the army came into a village and he said, bring all the monks before me. And he said, they've all fled to the hills except one monk in one monastery. And the general was pleased that they'd all fled because he knew that then his power was known. And he couldn't understand why this one monk hadn't fled. And so he went to see the monk. And the monk was standing in the middle of the courtyard of the monastery. And the army commander walked up to him and he said, why didn't you flee? Don't you know who I am? I could take my sword and I could cut through you without blinking an eye. And the monk looked him in the eye and said, don't you know who I am? I am somebody who could be cut through by your sword without blinking an eye. At that point, the commander bowed and left. Could you imagine what space that monk is in?
Tao Te Ching. One. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness. The gateway to all understanding. Two. When people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Being and non-being create each other. Difficult and easy support each other. Long and short define each other. High and low depend on each other. Before and after follow each other. Therefore the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. That is why it lasts forever. Three. If you overesteem great men, people become powerless. If you overvalue possessions, people begin to steal. The master leads by emptying people's minds and filling.
Some years ago, I had just given a talk on television in Canada when one of the announcers came up to me and said, you know, if one could believe that this universe is in charge of an intelligent and beneficent God. Don't you think he would naturally have provided us with an infallible guide to behavior and to the truth about the universe? And of course, I knew he meant the Bible. I said, no, I think nothing of the kind, because I think a loving God would not do something to his children that would rot their brains. Because if we had an infallible guide, we would think for ourselves, and therefore our minds would become atrophied. It is as if my grandfather had left me $1 million. I'm glad he didn't. And we have therefore to begin any discussion of the meaning of the life and teaching of Jesus with a look at this thorny question of authority, and especially the authority of Holy Scripture. Because in this country in particular, there are an enormous number of people who seem to believe that the Bible descended from heaven with an angel in the year 1611, which was when the so-called King James, or more correctly authorized version of the Bible, was translated into English. I had a crazy uncle who believed that every word of the Bible was literally true, including the marginal notes. And so whatever date it said in the marginal notes that the world was created in 4004 BC, and he believed it was the word of God. Until one day he was reading, I think, a passage in the book of Proverbs, and found a naughty word in the Bible. And from that time on he was through with it. You know, how Protestant can you get? Now, the question of authority needs to be understood because I am not going to claim any authority in what I say to you, except the authority, such as it is, of history. And that's a pretty uncertain authority. But from my point of view, the four Gospels are, I think, to be regarded on the whole as historical documents. I'll even grant the miracles. Because speaking as one heavily influenced by Buddhism, we're not very impressed by miracles. The traditions of Asia, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, and so forth, are full of miraculous stories. And we take them in our stride. We don't think that there are any sign of anything in particular except psychic power. And we in the West have, by scientific technology, accomplished things of a very startling nature. We could blow up the whole planet, and Tibetan magicians have never promised to do anything like that. And I'm really a little scared of the growing interest in psychic power, because that's what I call psychotechnics. And we've made such a mess of things with ordinary techniques that heaven only knows what we might do if we got hold of psychotechnics and started raising people from the dead and prolonging life in